I'm Jason, and welcome to Custom Cards. Now generally Andrew hosts this series, but unfortunately I lost a bet with him as to how many ideas of his Wizards of the Coast would steal in a 3-month period. Not only are they coming out with a Norse mythology inspired set shortly after Andrew debuted his, but now they've also finally finished the cycle of Angels from Avacyn Restored, only weeks after Andrew did the same. So now while he's on vacation, I'm stuck here talking to you about the primary set I've been working on for the past several years, which is a Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time set. Side note, this set is made for draft and sealed only, with no intention of mixing with real existing cards. That means certain cards that would be busted in constructed formats could be entirely fine for this self-contained environment. As with any set inspired by existing content, this is a top-down design approach. For more detail on what that means, check out the video in the top right corner. The important part is when I started working on this set, I wrote out all the aspects of the game I wanted to capture. The first one that jumped out to me was items. Collecting items is an integral part to every Zelda game, and though it's probably no surprise, I felt items were best represented by equipment. So there's an equipment theme in the set. The main problem with equipment is that at common and uncommon, it's hard to balance the strength of repeatable buffs to your creatures with the cost to both cast and equip the artifact. I don't want to end up with something as busted as Bone Splitter, but I'm also not trying to make cards as unplayable as Bronze Sword. Now, Zendikar Rising had a decent way of dealing with this, attaching to a creature upon entering the battlefield, but the solution I came up with, which was long before Zendikar Rising came out, was to give some equipment alternative ways to pay the equip cost. The main alternative cost is to tap 1 or 2 creatures. To equip a Kokiri Sword, you can pay 2 mana, or you can tap an untapped creature you control, turning one of your insignificant creatures essentially into a mana producer. Equipment at higher rarities use things like sacrificing permanents, discarding cards, and paying life to replace the equip cost. To equip the Skull Mask, you can either pay 3 mana or 3 life. Also, it gives each equipped creature you control Menace. The next part I felt was most important to capture about Ocarina of Time is the songs. All songs in the set are instants or sorceries, and I gave them a song subtype so that I could create a deck archetype focused on casting songs. Though there are songs in every color, the majority of them felt at home in Bant colors, with white-blue being the logical choice for a draft archetype, since this is the most controlling color pair in Bant. Every song card also has the verse mechanic, which allows you to exile the spell face down from your hand for a cost of 3, kind of like a morph spell. Then you can cast the spell later for a different cost, sometimes reducing the cost of the spell or giving a more powerful effect. A card like Epona's Song has the same effect whether you pay full retail for it or if you exile it from your hand and later cast it for its verse cost. But if you don't have anything to spend your mana on turn 3, you might as well exile it from your hand so that you can get a discount on the spell later when you use it. Since the video game essentially has a cycle of warping songs, it only felt appropriate to give them a linking mechanic other than just verse. So each of them gets a more powerful ability if you cast them from exile. When you cast Prelude of Light for 3 mana, you get 2 1/2 white soldier creature tokens. But if you exile it for 3 and then cast it for 3 mana, you're going to get 3 tokens instead. A less prominent feature of Zelda games, but something I really wanted to capture, was the feeling of stocking up on supplies right before fighting a boss, and I ended up doing that with the Resupply mechanic. Resupply says at the beginning of your end step, if you cast no spells this turn, you may pay a cost to return this card from your graveyard to your hand. Now this captures the flavor I mentioned, because you're taking time to go to a shop or scour bushes for these expendable items. Mechanically, having an ability that lets you keep getting the same card back over and over is incredibly powerful. This is counterbalanced by 2 things. First, the cost to resupply is generally high. 3 or 4 mana is where most of these sit. The second counterbalancing measure is that these are all sorceries, except for 1 instant, Health Potion, that is only beneficial to use on your own turn. This is very important because if these were instants like counterspells or something, heaven forbid, then you could cast it on your opponent's turn and bring it back on your own turn over and over and over. But since they're all sorceries, you cast it on one turn, then you can't resupply that turn because you cast a spell. You have to wait until the following turn to resupply, and then you won't be able to use that spell again until the next turn, and so on. These work really well in multiples since you can resupply any number of cards at a time if you have the mana, which I think plays even more into the theme of shopping all at once. Resupply also works well with songs because using the verse ability is not casting a spell. Having synergies between multiple keywords and archetypes is very important. Resupply is primarily blue-red with a couple of cards in white. Our last keyword mechanic is Impend, which is an ability in Jund colors that represents the wild enemies Link faces. Impend says whenever this creature attacks, if defending player controls no creatures with greater power than it, then you get an effect. Having greater power than your opponent's creatures is the primary focus of all 3 color pairs in Jund, with red-black being aggro, black-green being mid-range with a focus on +1/+1 counters, and green-red being the big fatties. Impend also synergizes a lot with equipment because a lot of equipment buffs power, helping to trigger the Impend ability turn after turn. Whenever Ravenous Weeds attacks, if no creatures your opponents control has greater power than it gains trample until end of turn, which is going to be pretty easy for the first few turns, seeing as you're getting a 4 power creature for 3 mana. But the creatures with more powerful Impend effects generally have lower power, so that it's harder to trigger them. For example, when Vengeful Poe attacks, it can give a creature -1/-1 until end of turn, if it has greater power, but it's a 2/2 for 2, which means it's going to be harder to get that to happen. Those are all the keyword mechanics for the set, but there are a few other Ocarina of Time themes that I really wanted to encompass. The most important one being side quests. One of the most iconic parts of any Zelda game is the side quests. These are special, so I've made a 5-card monocolor cycle of them. Side quests use the Saga card template and have different methods to progress from chapter to chapter. For Trading Sequence, each chapter has an activated ability, and in place of the Saga reminder text, we have rules text that says activate abilities of this side quest only equal to its progress counters, only once each turn, and only as a sorcery, then put a progress counter on it. This means that when you play Trading Sequence, assuming you have the mana, you can pay 1 and a white to create a 1/1 white Cuckoo creature token with flying. Then you put a progress counter on Trading Sequence. On your next turn, you're allowed to activate the next ability in sequence, which is 2 and a white, you gain 4 life. Then on your next turn, 3 and a white, create a weapon token, which I'll tell you right now is an equipment artifact with equipped creature gets +1/+0 and equip for 2 mana. And finally, 4 and a white, search your library for an equipment card and put it onto the battlefield attached to a creature you control, shuffle your library. Just like the real side quest in the game, this card takes a lot of time and a lot of resources, but at the end of it, you get something pretty powerful. Another theme of the set, and a draft archetype, is rupees. Now, rupees, like most currency that we've seen, are colorless artifacts that sacrifice for mana. However, I wanted them to be a little bit different than treasure or gold tokens, so they sacrifice specifically for colorless mana. Now, while this is a minor difference, I feel it adds flavor, as the main things you can buy entirely with rupees would be artifacts, whereas creatures and spells, you'll still need some amount of natural mana to cast. Some decks will use the rupees to ramp into big scary threats, while other decks have alternative uses for them. Waterfall Game Master gives you a rupee when it enters the battlefield, but it also allows you to sacrifice an artifact in order to scry 1. The Riverside Shopkeeper gives you rupees every single time a land enters the battlefield under your control, but since he costs 5 mana, it's not going to be as good for ramping as it is for his second ability, which is sacrifice 3 rupees, gain control of target non-creature permanent. This ability is great because it combines blue being able to take control of permanents with green's ability to remove non-creature permanents. While this is extremely powerful, I don't think it's too powerful because remember, this card is going to only be used in limited, where creatures are the most important permanents on the battlefield. Finally, from sages to bosses to the hero of time himself, there are a lot of legendary creatures in this set. Green-White's draft archetype is legendary creatures, and I wanted to show you just one of them today. So let's take a look at the first boss of the game, Queen Goma. Queen Goma is a legendary creature spider boss, of course, for 2 green. She's a 3/3, and Queen Goma enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. Because she's the spider, she has reach, and for green mana, remove a +1/+1 counter from Queen Goma. Queen Goma fights target creature that entered the battlefield this turn. My intention when making legendary creatures is to make strong, unique cards, but of course I also want to incorporate a lot of flavor into them. Restricting her ability to fight only creatures that entered the battlefield this turn makes it a lot more interesting than if she could just fight anything. On top of that, removing a +1/+1 counter in order to activate the ability makes it so that she's actually weaker when fighting and on further turns, but also allows her to get additional +1/+1 counters from other cards in order to continue fighting creatures. From a top-down perspective, this ability makes sense because Link has essentially just entered the battlefield at the end of the Great Deku Tree. And those are all the major themes and mechanics for the Ocarina of Time custom Magic set. This set is several years in the making, and every detail of the set has undergone intense scrutiny, but I'm still interested to hear any feedback you may have. In addition, let me know if you want to see more videos on this set, as there are a lot of sweet characters, enemies, and items that I haven't gotten to show you yet. Thank you for watching.